questions you have, what thoughts, because interesting, and again, we can do more over in the cocktail area, but be curious any thoughts or questions that you might have. Go ahead.
Could you grab the mic?
Yeah, sorry.
You mentioned something earlier about getting employees to travel and swap places, X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
And we were talking about some of the organisations we work for, getting people to travel from one part of London to another, i.e. Staines, can be quite challenging.
Right.
Does that say something about the level of engagement versus satisfaction?
I think, let me give you a thought, right? Because you can imagine when you talk to people about moving from one country to another, how many people have moved from one country to another in here? What's the hardest move you make? The first one, right? And most people, when they first think about it, are afraid to move, as you say, even from London to the other part of London. It's a huge deal. What I found that makes a difference, and I'm going to do this a little bit playfully, is that Hollywood moment. You know, if you tell somebody, I want you to go here, over to this other side of London, to go get this done, you're telling them what to do. In my mind, what you have to do is figure out, how do you sell them on that? Why would you pick them to go there? And then, again, to use that phrase, how would you create a Hollywood moment out of that? How would you say, what was your name?
Zoe.
Zoe. If I said, Zoe, this is what we want you to do. Look, we have an opportunity, and we think you've got the right skills. We'd like you to go over there and help this team learn to do this as well as you do, because you're one of the best we have. And if you can do that for us, we'd be really grateful. If you take that kind of approach versus, we want you to go here because we need you to go do this, and you know what I'm saying, versus prescriptive versus here's what we want to do. But again, you got to try different styles for your culture, but always find out what's important to that person. And if they're a person who wants to grow their career and you can help them see that, or if they just like to know they're making a difference and you can give them recognition for it, and find a way to give them something special for what they're doing. Okay.
Thank you.
Other questions? Yes.
How do you embed a cultural change of values in an organisation?
That is the toughest thing to do, isn't it? Toughest thing. And part of the question is, how do you engage? How do you embed a cultural change of values? Very difficult. It has to start at the top, and it can't be an HR-driven process. Number one, right? Because if it's coming from HR, it's DOA, dead on arrival, right? It's got to come from the top leadership. And it's got, ideally the CEO or chairman and CEO have got to say, this is what we believe. And then you got to hold people accountable for it. And then I don't believe in rating values on a performance review, because again, you get all those people that are nice but don't perform, and you get the mediocrity. But you can assess those values. Because a lot of times the things that people are pretty good about talking about quantitative things if you miss. But it's the qualitative matters people sometimes hesitate on. But if you can learn to have those coaching sessions, whether it's a review or in the middle of just when it happens, and say, look, I know you achieved this goal, but the way you went about it didn't fit some of our values. Have that conversation early and frequently with where you need it. At the same time, find ways to recognize people who do. One of the new recognition awards we're creating is about people who live our values. And we're going to single them out, make them heroes, if you will, and be specific about what they did to live up to those values. So I think you have to address it on both sides and do it leadership from the top and then the follow-up and be consistent. But it takes a while, so don't get disappointed if it doesn't happen right away. Other questions? Yes.
How do you sell the case for change to senior executives? Often so they might shifting the numbers on a quarterly basis is much easier than shifting the culture. How do you make that case for change? How do you sell it to people that can't necessarily see it, or leaders that can't see it?
No, that is a tremendous question, and I can answer it in a couple ways. First of all, I think it depends on the relationships that you have. Are you frequently in the business? Do they see you as a business leader? I travel about 70% of the time in my job, and I typically am with the CEO and the CAO, who's kind of like a COO for us. and head of marketing. That's kind of the group that travels together, right? So you have that, I think you gotta have a relationship to start. If you're just an HR person sitting in your office and you come up, even if you're right, it doesn't work. You gotta have that relationship, you gotta have, the right influencing skills. Now, the other way to do it is don't sell it yourself. I could care less whether the light's on me or the light's on you or you, right? So often what I try to do is I will partner with a person. I mentioned the ambassador program that I'm getting ready to kick off. Guess what I did? I went to one of our regional presidents who's very well thought of. He's aggressive, and I sold him on the idea. We're out touring, meeting with distributors, and we were touring. I said, you know what? I think what would be great is this kind of idea. And we started talking about it. Before long, it was his idea. Why don't you chair it? I'll put my team on it. We'll do all the legwork. You chair it. We'll get it done. Guess what? It's going to be done in 90 days. Right? Don't worry about what I said. Give away the limelight. Give it to somebody else. And then on more practical things, like we just did the employee engagement. Our company's going through a lot of transformation right now. So we did a survey, and it's got some things that aren't as good as I'd like. So I'm covering that with obviously the HR team, but also with all the rest of the executive committee. And then giving them their own, letting them meet first with their direct HR rep. And then when we come together as an executive committee, they already have a point of view about what we need to do. So, I think sometimes what happens behind the scenes and working with others is a much more effective way than just coming up, even if you're right, because sometimes you're not the right person. And thirdly, sometimes it's good to get an outside person to say what you would have said anyway. That's probably my least favorite, but sometimes that works too. Hope that helps.
That does.
Okay. Other questions? Yes?
I've got somewhat of a follow-on question from that, but I was very interested in your description of the onboarding program that you have at Bacardi.
Yes.
Some of the elements of that would, to my mind, be quite difficult to sell to the executive community, such as, teaching people how to mix drinks. How do you translate the value of those activities into business terms?
In our company, teaching people to mix drinks is an easy thing to get past the executive committee. But you can substitute drinks for anything else, right? But part of what we say, and we actually have Becoming Bacardi kind of for everybody, and then we have an even more developed one for more senior people. And what it involves in is a couple things. First of all, what I always tell people when they join, when you first start, don't try to be the hero and just prove you can score. We know you can score, that's why we hired you. And to use a baseball analogy, just get on base. I don't care if you get hit by the ball. Get on base and build relationships. In other words, do little things well. Don't worry about, we know you're smart, we know you can do all those things. Do little things well and build relationships. So what we do structurally is we put together a pretty comprehensive agenda of what happens kind of the first 8 weeks they're with us. And it's done before they arrive. We tell them before they arrive. We give them the book to read before they get there. And then they tour the key facilities for us. First stop is what we call Casa Bacardi, which is Puerto Rico, which is where we make about 88% of the rum. They go there because it also, the reason it's called Casa Bacardi, that's where all the heritage is, and a lot of the family worked there after we got exiled and so forth. So a lot to learn there. Then we bring them over here to the UK. They visit our marketing team that's based here, learn about the brands. Then they go down the road and they go where Bombay Sapphire is made at Laverstock. And then they go further up the road into Scotland and so forth. And then they go to meet the European team. And so we take them around, building those relationships. And I sometimes the CEO said, yeah, but I need them in place quick. I say, you know what? I know you do, but I promise you, if you let them get a good first start, they'll move faster. Because you don't get a second chance at a first start. But you have to have things that are practical, that they do when they get there. It's not just visiting, but there's actually clear objectives they're there to achieve and key relationships they're there to build, right? And then in our business, as I said earlier, people actually expect that the moment you say you work for Bacardi that you know how to make a cocktail. And people want to be able to, you want to be able to represent the brand. So we teach people to do that very quickly. So that's a few highlights. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you.
Okay.
One more question, if there is one.
Yes.
Hi, Ian Clark. Thanks for the talk. Really interesting.
Thank
What
you.
I'd be keen to understand is, when you do your pulse checks, your employer engagement, do you triangulate that with other businesses that you engage with? And what are the results?
Yeah. So let me see if I can answer your question correctly on what do we do, how do we do the engagement survey, and do we check with others? So we have an outside company do it, and it gives us the measure of where their standard company is and where their high performing companies are. So it's through IBM, and so it's very very comprehensive, and so we compare that with where we are. Now, I don't really care where Diageo is, because that doesn't matter. What I care is how do we stand, how do our people feel, and how are we against the norm? And what I am pleased to say is that, not this survey, but the survey before, we had 92% participation rate around the world. You don't get that kind of an international company. It can mean one of two things. One, that people are so pissed off, they just want to let you know. Fortunately, that wasn't the case. Secondly, is that they really believe something will be done about it, so they participate, right? Because they trust that you'll do something. And one of ours, important to your question, you have to understand where people are grounded, right? And pride in Bacardi is like in rare air as well. It's over the highest performing companies, we're still like 8 points higher, right? Now we have other areas where we're woefully below, but as I mentioned before, we're going through a tremendous amount of organizational change. And what they have told me, and I've seen this in the past as well, if you have people deeply engaged in believing in the company, you can withstand a lot of change and turmoil. If you lose that, you're going to have great difficulty ever getting it back. Great difficulty. And in our company, we have just under 15% of our employees with 20 years or more service. Fantastic level of commitment. As long as we don't take that for granted, we'll be okay. But as we go through all this change, that's why we added the pulse surveys, quite frankly, is so we could check in along the way to see, are we progressing appropriately? Okay, so I hope that helps. I'm happy to talk about that more. All right.